Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back to the sun-baked cobblestones of ancient Rome. Imagine the dust motes dancing in the Colosseum's towering shafts of light, the roar of 100,000 voices, the scent of sweat blood, and something vaguely like cheap wine lingering in the air. You're there in the stands, your toga perhaps a little too tight after that last plate of garum-drenched fish, leaning forward, eager for the spectacle. On the sand below, figures emerge gleaming with oil, their muscles taut weapons glinting. These aren't just fighters. They're the rock stars, the bad boys, the social media influencers of their day. Even if their likes were a thumbs up or a roar of approval rather than a heart emoji. You're about to dive into a world where life was cheap, entertainment was brutal, and even the most celebrated figures could be bought and sold. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on hallowed, albeit sandy ground, long before the Colosseum became a tourist attraction. To truly understand the baffling dual nature of the gladiator part celebrity part property, you need to cast your mind back to their origins, which are frankly a bit morbid. Forget the Hollywood glamour for a moment. The earliest known gladiatorial contests weren't about grand spectacles or mass entertainment. No, you're witnessing something far more solemn, a somber ritual unfolding in the heart of Rome. It's 264 BC, and you're at the funeral of Decimus Junius Brutus Para. His sons, in a poignant display of pietas, that deep-seated Roman respect for duty, family, and gods, have decided to honor their deceased father in a rather spirited way. You watch as three pairs of gladiators, likely war captives or criminals, are brought forth. They are not fighting for glory, not for freedom, and certainly not for product endorsements. They are fighting for the departed. This is a munus, a duty, a gift offered to the dead. The shedding of blood, it was believed, appeased the spirits of the deceased. It was a private affair, not a public holiday. The setting isn't a grand amphitheater, but rather the Forum Boreum, the cattle market, which surprisingly was also used for public assemblies and sacrifices. You might notice the smell of cattle and, well, other less pleasant market aromas mingling with the metallic tang in the air. It's a stark contrast to the perfume and incense that would later fill the air of the grand arenas. This early form of gladiatorial combat is raw, unrefined. The combatants are probably not highly trained specialists. They are in essence human sacrifices, performing a ritualistic dance with death to ensure the peaceful passage of a soul. Think of it as a very intense, very bloody eulogy. This mainstream historical fact that gladiatorial contests originated as part of aristocratic funeral rites sets the stage for everything that follows. It provides the initial, deeply practical reason for these fights detached from any notion of entertainment. Now here's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. While most gladiators were male, there's evidence, though, scant of female gladiators known as gladiatrices. Imagine the scandal, or perhaps the sheer audacity of a woman stepping into the arena armor, clashing sword raised. They were rare, often seen as a novelty, or a daring extravagance for a patron to put on display, and they were eventually banned by Emperor Septimius Severus around 200 AD. So while you're watching these grim funeral games, just picture for a moment a fierce woman standing her ground against a trained opponent, It's a truly fringe aspect of gladiatorial history, yet it highlights the sheer variety and occasional boundary-pushing nature of Roman spectacle, even in its nascent stages. You might wonder how these funeral rites morphed into the blockbuster entertainment of the empire. Historians still argue whether the transition from private munus to public spectacle was a gradual evolution or driven by specific political ambitions. Was it simply the Romans' insatiable appetite for games that spurred it on? Or was it a deliberate strategy by ambitious politicians to curry favor with the masses? Whatever the precise catalyst, you can feel the shift in the air even in these early days. The seed of something grander, something far more encompassing is being sown. The public, albeit a select segment of it at first, is beginning to take notice. The idea of armed combatants fighting to the death for public viewing is for some beginning to take root not just as a religious duty, but as a thrilling diversion. You can almost hear the faint murmur of anticipation, a prelude to the roar of millions. The evolution was slow, like a glacier grinding its way through a valley, but relentless. From the Forum Boreum, these contests moved to larger public spaces, eventually graduating to purpose-built amphitheaters. The initial solemnity of the funeral ritual began to erode, replaced by a growing appetite for drama, for bloodshed, for the ultimate display of courage and skill. You feel a chill, a shiver down your spine as you consider the path ahead. The reverence for the dead was about to be overshadowed by the clamor of the living, demanding more, always more. The stage was being set for the grand, brutal theater that would define Roman entertainment for centuries. And these early reluctant fighters, bound by duty to the deceased, were unwittingly paving the way for the emergence of the Roman superstar. You're no longer at a somber funeral. The air vibrates with anticipation, the crowds murmur, rising like the hum of 1,000 cicadas. The gladiatorial contests, once a private family affair, have burst onto the public stage, transforming from a solemn munus into a full-blown ludus. A game, a spectacle, a form of public entertainment. This is where the magic, or perhaps the madness, truly begins. You find yourself standing in a burgeoning amphitheater, a simple wooden structure for now, but one that promises the grandeur of the Colosseum in centuries to come. The year is no longer 264 BC. Rome has grown, its population swelling, and with it, its appetite for entertainment. The reason for this shift is multifaceted, but one primary driver stands out: politics. In the cutthroat world of Roman Republican politics, popularity was currency. And what better way to win over the masses than to put on a dazzling, deadly show? Ambitious politicians seeking election or simply to enhance their public image began to sponsor these games. It wasn't just about honoring the dead anymore. It was about honoring the living specifically, the living who could cast a vote or shout your name in the forum. Imagine a modern-day politician throwing a free concert with the most popular bands, but instead of music, it's a fight to the death. You can almost feel the calculated generosity in the air, a politician's smile that's a little too wide as he waves to the cheering crowd. The increasing frequency and scale of these games also reflect Rome's growing military prowess. As the Republic expanded, so did its supply of captives. These prisoners of war, considered chattel, became the perfect raw material for the arena. No longer just a handful of condemned criminals, the ranks of gladiators swelled with defeated warriors from distant lands. This mainstream historical fact that the expansion of the Roman Republic and Empire provided a continuous source of captives for the gladiator schools is crucial. It's a grim testament to the Roman machine efficiently turning conquest into entertainment and profit. You see faces from Gaul, from Germania, from Africa, all united by the grim prospect of the sand. As you look around, you notice something curious about the crowds. They aren't just a homogeneous mass of Romans. There are patricians in their fine togas, plebeians in their simpler tunics, even slaves often allowed to attend such public spectacles. The games were a great equalizer in a deeply stratified society. For a few hours, everyone shared the same thrill, the same gasp, the same roar. This shared experience fostered a sense of Roman identity, a collective celebration of power and spectacle. It was a pressure release valve for the city, a way to keep the masses entertained and crucially distracted from other less pleasant realities of life in a sprawling, often chaotic metropolis. You realize this isn't just entertainment. It's social glue, binding together disparate elements of Roman society. Now, for a quirky tidbit beyond the main event, the venations, staged animal hunts, became an integral part of the gladiatorial games. Imagine lions, bears, even crocodiles unleashed into the arena, hunted down by skilled bestiarii. It's not just human versus human. It's human versus nature, albeit nature that's been trapped and starved for dramatic effect. You might smell the sharp, wild scent of the animals, a primal odor that mixes with the dust and the human sweat. These hunts were incredibly expensive, showcasing the immense wealth of the game's sponsors, and they added another layer of visceral thrill, turning the arena into a living, breathing, dangerous zoo. It's a far cry from a quiet funeral procession, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the ludi were primarily a means of social control bred in circuses to keep the populace docile, or a genuine expression of Roman culture and religious devotion. Was it a cynical manipulation by the elite, or a natural evolution of communal festivities? You ponder this as you watch the crowd, their faces rapt, their attention fixed on the arena. Are they truly enjoying themselves? Or are they simply too enthralled to complain about the price of grain or the latest tax? The truth, as is often the case with complex historical phenomena, probably lies somewhere in the middle. It's likely a bit of both genuine cultural expression evolving into a powerful tool for maintaining public order and political influence. You feel the growing energy, the shift in purpose. The fighters are no longer anonymous figures fulfilling a grim duty. They are beginning to acquire personalities, reputations. The crowd starts to pick favorites to remember names. The individual triumphs and tragedies become part of the collective memory. You hear whispers of a Thracian gladiator who fought with incredible ferocity, or a Mirmillo known for his calm demeanor under pressure. This nascent hero worship is the fertile ground from which the gladiator as celebrity will spring. The stage is larger, the stakes higher, and the audience is ready to embrace its new idols. The roar you hear isn't just for the dead anymore. It's for the living, the fighting, the dying, right there on the sand. The phenomenon is taking hold slowly, but surely, pulling you deeper into its thrilling, terrifying embrace. You've seen the spectacle grow, the crowds swell, but now you need to understand the crucible that forged these warriors, the ludus gladiatorius, the gladiatorial school. This isn't your local gym with motivational posters and protein shakes. Oh no. This is a brutal, unforgiving institution where discipline is absolute, and every day is a battle for survival long before you step onto the arena sand. You stand at the gates of such a school, perhaps one of the most famous, like the Ludus Magnus in Rome, just east of the Colosseum. The air inside is thick with the scent of sweat leather and something metallic that suggests blood. You hear the rhythmic thump of wooden swords on training dummies, the sharp crack of a whip, and the grunts of exertion. Step inside, and you'll find yourself in a harsh, utilitarian world. The gladiators, many of whom are slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, live a life of strict regimen. Their days are governed by the lanista, the owner and trainer of the school, a man whose authority is absolute. The lanista is often a figure of grim repute, both respected for his skill in training and reviled for his trade. He holds the power of life and death over his gladiators, and he's primarily motivated by profit. The better his gladiators, the more money he makes from hiring them out for games. So while he's brutal, he also needs to keep his investments alive and in prime fighting condition. It's a delicate balance of cruelty and careful husbandry. Your eyes follow a group of new recruits. They're called novicii, and they're learning the absolute basics. They start with wooden swords, much heavier than the real thing, forcing them to build strength and endurance. They practice their stance, their footwork, their parries and thrusts day in and day out under the watchful, unforgiving eyes of the doctors, retired gladiators who now serve as instructors. You might wince as a doctor corrects a recruit's form with a sharp rap of his staff. There's no coddling here. The training is repetitive, monotonous, and designed to break down the individual and rebuild them as a fighting machine. This mainstream historical fact that gladiators underwent rigorous specialized training in dedicated schools under strict discipline is fundamental to their eventual prowess in the arena. The diet, surprisingly, isn't all about lean protein. In fact, a gladiator's diet was largely vegetarian, focused on barley and beans. This isn't because ancient Romans were pioneers of plant-based eating. No, it was more pragmatic. This diet, while perhaps not the most appetizing, provided the necessary calories and crucially a layer of subcutaneous fat. This fat, while perhaps not aesthetically pleasing by modern standards, was believed to offer a crucial protective layer shielding vital organs from shallow cuts and scrapes that would otherwise end a fight quickly. It allowed them to take a few hits and keep fighting, extending the spectacle for the crowd. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern bodybuilder. Yes, you want a six-pack, but if you want to survive a sword fight, you need a beer belly. It's a quirky tidbit that upends modern notions of athletic physique. Beyond the physical training, there's a psychological element too. Gladiators are trained to face death, to accept their fate with a stoic resolve. They live under the shadow of the octoramentum, a solemn oath they swear upon entering the school, pledging themselves to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to die by the sword, if commanded. This oath, a chilling echo of their status as property, binds them completely. You can see the grim determination in their eyes, the understanding that their lives are no longer their own. They are instruments wielded for entertainment. Historians still argue whether gladiators genuinely fought for glory and honor, or if their stoicism was simply a pragmatic acceptance of their grim fate. Was there a true warrior spirit, or just the desire to survive another day? You might observe a gladiator victorious, but weary, leaving the arena, and wonder what thoughts truly reside behind his impassive mask. Did he feel pride relief, or simply the gnawing fear of the next contest, the reality is likely a mix of all these emotions, a complex interplay of human will, and the harsh realities of their existence. Some undoubtedly found a grim satisfaction in their prowess, while others simply endured. As you leave the training ground, the rhythmic thud of wooden swords fading behind you, you appreciate the sheer grind of their daily existence. It's not just the dramatic clash in the arena. It's the endless hours of practice, the restricted diet, the constant threat of the whip, and the lanista's displeasure. This rigorous regimen, however, is precisely what transforms a captive into a contender, a pawn into a potential superstar. You realize that their celebrity, when it comes, is hard-won, forged in a crucible of pain and relentless effort. They are, in essence, highly refined, deadly products, meticulously prepared for the ultimate show. And the crowd, unknowingly or uncaringly, is waiting for them. You've witnessed the brutal training that shapes a gladiator, but now you're about to discover the magnetic pull they exerted over Roman society. You're in the stands of a bustling amphitheater, not yet the Colosseum, but a grand structure nonetheless. The air buzzes with an energy you can almost taste, a mix of anticipation, fear, and sheer excitement. When the gladiators emerge, their armor gleaming weapons, ready, a roar erupts from the crowd. It's not just noise. It's an emotional tidal wave, a visceral response to the figures standing before them. These are not merely slaves or condemned men. They are heroes, villains, and most powerfully, celebrities. Think of it in a society with no mass media, no internet, and limited public spectacles. Gladiatorial games were the ultimate entertainment. The gladiators themselves became the embodiment of courage, skill, and defiance in the face of death. Each fight was a narrative, a mini-drama played out on the sand, and the combatants were its stars. You find yourself leaning forward, picking out a favorite, perhaps the stoic Murmillo with his fish-crested helmet, or the nimble Retiarius with his net and trident. The crowd around you is doing the same, shouting encouragement, or perhaps grim predictions. This mainstream historical fact that gladiators, despite their enslaved or condemned status, could achieve immense popularity and even cult-like followings, is perhaps one of the most baffling aspects of Roman society. How could men who were legally property subject to the whims of their owners command such adoration? It's a paradox that speaks volumes about Roman values, a deep respect for martial prowess, a fascination with destiny, and an undeniable attraction to danger and spectacle. You might notice women in the audience, perhaps even some of the most respectable matrons, casting admiring glances. Gladiators were in many ways the ultimate bad boys, forbidden fruit for the upper classes, and aspirational figures for the lower. Beyond the immediate thrill of the fight, the gladiators captured the Roman imagination through their stories. Successful gladiators developed reputations, their victories recounted in taverns and inscribed on walls. They had fan clubs, literally with their names scrawled as graffiti throughout the city. Imagine walking through Pompeii and seeing Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh, etched into a wall. It's a quirky tidbit that brings their celebrity status into sharp focus, showing that even without social media, the Romans found ways to express their fervent fandom. They were the original action figures, the subjects of murals, mosaics, and even small figurines sold as souvenirs. Their images were everywhere, reinforcing their larger-than-life status. Their appeal was also tied to the raw, unfiltered honesty of the arena. In a society often governed by rigid social hierarchies and complex political maneuverings, the gladiatorial arena offered a brutal clarity. There was no hiding, no pretense. You either fought well or you died. This authenticity, however grim, resonated deeply with the Roman psyche. It tapped into fundamental human experiences of struggle, triumph, and mortality. You feel the collective gasp as a gladiator falls and the roar of approval as another delivers the final blow. It's a primal scene stripped bare of artifice. Historians still argue whether the Roman fascination with gladiators was primarily due to their perceived courage and discipline, or if it was simply the thrill of legalized violence and the opportunity for morbid entertainment. Was it a celebration of martial virtues or a descent into barbarity? You might lean one way or another as you observe the crowd's reaction. Some are undoubtedly admiring the skill, the technique, the bravery. Others are clearly reveling in the bloodlust. It's a messy, uncomfortable truth that the lines between admiration and voyeurism were often blurred. The crowd, you realize, isn't a monolith. It's a tapestry of varied motivations, all drawn to the irresistible pull of the arena. The emotional connection the audience felt was palpable. A gladiator who fought bravely, even if he lost, could earn the crowd's sympathy, prompting them to shout, "Mitte, let him go," to the editor of the games. A coward, however, would face scorn and swift death. Their performance wasn't just about winning. It was about how they comported themselves in the face of destiny. You sense the crowd's power, their collective voice, a force that could sway the fate of a man. This power, however, was also fleeting. The same crowd that cheered your victory could just as easily demand your demise. As the sun sets over the amphitheater, casting long shadows across the sand, you reflect on the strange blend of reverence and disregard. These men were glorified, yet utterly disposable. They were celebrated, yet ultimately owned. This fundamental contradiction is key to understanding the Roman world, a world where virtue and brutality, freedom and servitude, celebrity and chattel existed in unsettling proximity. And you realize that for many Romans, the appeal lay precisely in this tension, in the drama of lives lived and risked on the very edge of existence. The stage is set, and the spotlight, however brief, is intensely bright. You've seen the adoration, the raw energy of the crowd, and now you're about to grasp the full, startling extent of a successful gladiator's influence. It wasn't just fleeting applause, for the truly exceptional fame translated into a surprising level of fortune and social mobility, a bizarre twist in their otherwise enslaved existence. Imagine a modern sports superstar, complete with endorsement deals, legions of screaming fans, and a surprising amount of personal wealth. That, in a Roman context, was the pinnacle of a gladiator's career. You stand in the lavish villa of a wealthy Roman patron, where a mosaic depicts a famous gladiator, his name proudly displayed beneath his victorious pose. This wasn't just art. It was a status symbol, a conversation piece. People wanted to associate with success, even if that success came from the dust and blood of the arena. This mainstream historical fact, that popular gladiators could earn substantial wealth, including prize money gifts from admirers and even their freedom, is astonishing given their legal status as property. It highlights the peculiar paradox of Roman society, where a man could be owned, yet simultaneously be a public idol. Think about it, a gladiator, if he won enough bouts, could amass a significant fortune. Prize money for victorious fighters could be considerable enough to purchase their freedom manumission. Once freed, a former gladiator might even go on to become a lanista himself, owning and training his own stable of fighters, thus entering the very business that once owned him. You might spot a freed gladiator now, a wealthy entrepreneur strolling through the forum, his former scars a badge of honor, attracting admiring glances rather than pity. It's a powerful narrative of self-made success, however bloody the path. The adulation went far beyond just money. Women, particularly those of the upper classes, were often infatuated with gladiators. Graffiti from Pompeii shows passionate declarations of love for specific fighters, and it's well documented that some Roman matrons were willing to risk their reputations for affairs with these muscular, dangerous men. You can almost hear the whispered gossip in the Roman baths, the scandalized but secretly thrilled murmurs about a senator's wife and her dalliance with a Thracian. This is a quirky tidbit that showcases the almost rock star allure of these figures defying social norms and class boundaries. The gladiators, in their own way, were sex symbols embodying a raw, untamed masculinity that was perhaps lacking in the more refined political world of the Roman elite. Beyond romantic entanglement, patrons, particularly emperors, would shower successful gladiators with gifts, expensive jewels, fine clothing, even estates. An emperor might award a victorious gladiator a laurel wreath, a symbol of honor, or even grant him Roman citizenship. This wasn't just charity, it was a shrewd political move. By demonstrating generosity and associating themselves with popular figures, emperors further cemented their own public image and maintained the favor of the masses. You can almost see the emperor on his throne giving a magnanimous nod, understanding the immense public relations value of such a gesture. Historians still argue whether the wealth and freedom attained by some gladiators were genuine opportunities for social mobility, or merely carefully orchestrated exceptions designed to maintain the illusion of hope among the enslaved. Was it a true pathway out of servitude, or a gilded cage strategically presented to keep the gladiatorial system from collapsing under its own inherent injustices? You might consider the sheer numbers of gladiators who died in the arena versus the relatively few who achieved lasting fame and freedom. It's a sobering thought, suggesting that while the dream was powerful, the reality for most was far grimmer. The system, you realize, needed just enough success stories to keep the machinery turning. Yet despite their fame and fortune, the fundamental truth remained: they were still legally property. Even a freed gladiator, if he chose to re-enter the arena, which some did drawn by the thrill or the promise of even greater wealth, reverted to his legal status as property upon signing a new contract. It's a chilling reminder that their celebrity was conditional, their freedom often tenuous. You feel the weight of this contradiction, the constant shadow of their origins lurking beneath the glittering veneer of their success. They might have lived like kings for a brief, glorious period, but their lives were ultimately expendable, subject to the whims of the crowd, the editor, and the fundamental laws of Rome. The spectacle of their success was powerful, but the chains of ownership, however gilded, were always there. You've marveled at the gladiators' fame and fortune, the paradox of their celebrity. But now you confront the stark, uncomfortable truth that underpinned it all: their status as property. This isn't just a legal nicety. It's the fundamental reality that defined their existence, a chilling counterpoint to the cheers and adulation. No matter how many victories they secured, how many fans they amassed, or how much wealth they accumulated, a gladiator was at their core someone's asset, a commodity, to be bought, sold, and disposed of. Imagine for a moment being a prized possession, a rare racehorse, or a valuable piece of art. That's essentially how a gladiator was viewed by their lanista, or their owner. They were an investment. The lanista would purchase or acquire these individuals, often at auction, then invest in their training, food, and medical care. This mainstream historical fact that gladiators were considered rest things in Roman law, rather than personae persons, regardless of their fighting prowess or public popularity, is crucial to understanding their ultimate vulnerability. Their lives, despite the cheers, were never truly their own. You might observe a lanista haggling over the price of a newly arrived captive, examining their physique, their potential. It's a cold, calculated transaction devoid of sentiment. The gladiator standing there is often silent, their fate being decided without their input. They might be a Gaulish warrior captured in a recent campaign, or a Roman citizen condemned for a crime. Either way, their legal standing is the same property. This status meant they had no rights, no legal recourse, and their owner could do with them as they pleased, including sending them to their death in the arena. Consider the contracts involved. When a gladiator was hired out for games, the lanista would negotiate terms, often including a clause for payment for a slain gladiator. This meant that if their property died during the show, the editor, the sponsor of the games, would pay the lanista a higher fee than if the gladiator survived. It's a grim financial incentive, a quirky tidbit that underlines the dehumanizing nature of the system. The lanista made more money from a dead gladiator than a living one, effectively profiting from their demise. It's a shocking detail that cuts through any romantic notions of their existence. This status as property also explains why gladiators were often housed in barracks-like conditions within the ludus. They were kept under strict guard. Their movements controlled their lives, entirely dictated by their owners. Even if they achieved fame, they were still essentially prisoners. Their perceived freedom or celebrity was an illusion, a temporary veneer over a very real, very harsh reality. You might see a gladiator basking in the applause after a stunning victory, only to be escorted back to his cramped cell by armed guards, his brief moment of glory extinguished by the mundane truth of his servitude. Historians still argue whether the Roman public was truly aware of or simply chose to ignore the inherent moral contradictions of celebrating individuals who were fundamentally enslaved. Did they compartmentalize, seeing the gladiator as an archetype in the arena separate from the human being who was property? Or was it a casual acceptance of a social structure that deemed certain lives utterly expendable for the sake of entertainment? You ponder this as the crowd roars their faces alight with excitement, seemingly oblivious to the chains that bind the very men they are cheering for. The spectacle, you realize, often obscured the grim reality. Even the process of manumitio, or manumission, where a gladiator might buy their freedom, was a complex negotiation. It wasn't simply a benevolent act. It was a business transaction. The lanista would demand a substantial sum, often accumulated by the gladiator from prize money and gifts, effectively selling back the life that they had initially owned. And even then, a freed gladiator still carried the stigma of their past, often finding limited opportunities outside the arena world they knew. Their freedom was often conditional, tethered to the very system that had enslaved them. You feel the weight of this fundamental truth, the constant reminder that for all their prowess and popularity, gladiators lived on the edge of a precipice, their lives balanced precariously between adoration and ultimate disposability. Their owners held absolute power, and the cheers of the crowd, while exhilarating, were ultimately ephemeral. The gladiator's life, however glamorous in moments, was a testament to the brutal efficiency of Roman control, where even the most celebrated could be stripped of their humanity for the sake of spectacle. The arena, you realize, was not just a stage for combat, but a powerful symbol of Roman power over life itself. You've seen the gladiators' fame and their shocking status as property, but now let's pull back and witness the grand puppet masters at play, the emperors. These men, absolute rulers of Rome, understood the immense power of the games. They weren't just attending for fun. They were orchestrating, manipulating, and leveraging the blood sport for their own political gain and to maintain a tight grip on public opinion. Imagine yourself in the imperial box, high above the roaring crowd. You see the emperor, perhaps a grim-faced Tiberius, or a flamboyant Nero, observing the spectacle. He doesn't just watch, he presides. His thumbs up or thumbs down gesture holds the power of life and death, not just for the gladiators, but for the mood of the entire city. This mainstream historical fact that emperors frequently sponsored and presided over gladiatorial games to cultivate popularity, demonstrate power, and control the masses is a cornerstone of imperial Roman governance. The games were a direct line to the hearts and minds of the Roman people. The sheer scale of imperial games was staggering. To celebrate a victory, a new temple, or simply to distract from a famine or political unrest, an emperor might put on games lasting for days, even weeks, involving hundreds of gladiators and thousands of wild animals. Think of Trajan's Dacian triumph in 107 AD, which featured 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals over 123 days. It was an exercise in mind-boggling logistics and unimaginable expense, all paid for by the imperial treasury. You can almost feel the collective awe, bordering on stupefaction, of the common Roman citizen, witnessing such a display of seemingly limitless power and generosity. These lavish spectacles served multiple purposes. Firstly, they were a direct display of the emperor's wealth and generosity. In an era before welfare states providing bread and circuses, panem et circenses was a primary means of ensuring public contentment and preventing riots. A well-fed, well-entertained populace was less likely to grumble about rising taxes or military campaigns. You might notice a subtle shift in the crowd's mood after a particularly spectacular display, their earlier complaints about daily life momentarily forgotten in the thrill of the moment. It was a brilliant, if cynical, strategy of social control. Secondly, the games reinforced the social hierarchy and the emperor's supreme authority. As emperor, you sat in the most prominent seat. Your every gesture magnified your decisions final. The gladiators, even the famous ones, were ultimately under your thumb, subject to your whim. This was a clear demonstration of imperial power, the ability to command life and death, to orchestrate immense public events, and to hold the attention of your entire capital. You can see the subtle nods of assent from senators in their special seating acknowledging the emperor's dominance. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some emperors like Commodus famously chose to participate in the games themselves. Imagine the son of Marcus Aurelius, clad in a lion skin, entering the arena to fight not against equally trained gladiators that would be too risky even for an emperor, but against wild animals or carefully selected, often unarmed opponents. While some historians dismiss this as the act of a madman, others see it as a desperate attempt to connect with the populace, to embody the idealized Roman virtues of strength, and martial prowess, however manufactured the context. You might cringe at the sight, questioning the sanity of a ruler who would debase himself in such a manner, yet the crowd, you notice, often roared its approval. Historians still argue whether the Roman emperors were genuinely interested in the gladiatorial contests as a form of sport and entertainment, or if their participation and sponsorship were purely cynical acts of political manipulation. Was there an authentic passion for the spectacle, or was it entirely about maintaining power? You might observe an emperor's expression during a particularly brutal bout. Is it genuine excitement or a practiced mask of imperial detachment? The truth, as with most human motivations, likely lies in a murky blend of both. Perhaps even a man with absolute power could be drawn into the raw, primal drama unfolding before him, even as he coldly calculated its political benefits. The legacy of the imperial games is complex. They cemented the power of the emperor, entertained the masses, and provided a brutal yet captivating reflection of Roman values. They were a necessary expense for maintaining stability, a lavish indulgence, and a chilling reminder of Rome's mastery over life itself. You feel the immense weight of the imperial gaze, the power that flowed from that elevated seat, dictating the fates of men and beasts and shaping the very fabric of Roman public life. The roar of the crowd, you realize, was often a controlled echo of the emperor's will. You've delved into the world of gladiators, but Roman life, like any society, relied on a sprawling network of less glamorous yet utterly essential professions. Now let's pivot from the dazzling arena to the murky, often smelly underbelly of ancient Roman daily life, starting with a job that truly makes you appreciate modern plumbing: the urine collector, or fullones. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine yourself strolling through the bustling streets of Rome, perhaps near the larger public latrines or the baths. You might see individuals, often slaves, or the very poor, moving through the crowds with large jars or amphorae. Their mission? To collect urine. It sounds absolutely disgusting to our modern sensibilities, but in ancient Rome, urine was a surprisingly valuable commodity. This mainstream historical fact, that human urine was collected and used extensively in Roman industries, particularly in the fulling, cleaning, and processing of wool and tanning trades, is a testament to their resourcefulness and their ability to repurpose what we consider waste. Why urine, you ask? Because it contains ammonia, a powerful cleaning agent. In the fulling workshops where raw wool was cleaned and cloth was whitened, urine was a crucial ingredient. The cloth would be trampled in large vats of urine, a process that cleaned and degreased it. You can almost imagine the pungent, eye-watering fumes emanating from these workshops. Forget the scent of freshly laundered linen. This was more like a potent cocktail of ammonia and, well, human effluvium. It certainly gives a new meaning to dry cleaning, doesn't it? The urine wasn't just for cloth. Tanners also used it to process animal hides, helping to remove hair and soften the leather. It was so valuable, in fact, that Emperor Vespasian famously levied a tax on its collection, leading to the well-known phrase, pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. You might chuckle at the irony of a tax on pee, but it underscores just how integrated this waste product was into the Roman economy. This quirky tidbit about Vespasian's urine tax illustrates the practical, albeit unappealing value placed on this resource. The people who performed these jobs, the fullones. Though the fullones were more the laundry workers themselves, the urine collectors were often the lowest rung, were rarely celebrated. They were part of the vast, often invisible workforce that kept Rome functioning. Their role was essential, if unsung, and certainly unglamorous. You can picture them often with rough hands and stained clothing, carrying their heavy jars through the bustling city, largely ignored by the wealthier citizens. Historians still argue whether the fullones had a higher social standing than the actual collectors, or if they were all generally lumped into a low-status category due to the nature of their work. Was there a subtle hierarchy within these dirty trades, or were they all considered equally ignoble? You might observe the different reactions of passers-by to a fuller working in his shop versus a collector openly carrying his pungent cargo. The nuance of Roman social stratification, you realize, extended even to those handling the city's waste. This reliance on urine for industrial purposes highlights a fundamental difference between ancient and modern societies. Without the sophisticated chemical industries of today, Romans had to find natural, often organic solutions to their industrial needs. Their world was far more integrated with its natural byproducts, for better or worse. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but you can't deny their ingenuity in making the most of what was available. So while you might be accustomed to the gleaming facades of modern laundromats and tanneries, remember the Roman fullones and their unappetizing but essential work. Their efforts, however humble, were a vital cog in the complex machinery of Roman daily life, ensuring that the togas of the elite were white and the sandals on their feet were soft. It's a vivid reminder that history isn't just about emperors and gladiators. It's also about the countless ordinary individuals who kept the wheels of civilization turning, often performing jobs that would make our stomachs churn. From the pungent world of urine collectors, you now step into an even more precarious profession, one where a single mistake could be fatal: the imperial food tasters. Imagine dining with the most powerful man in the world, the Roman emperor, knowing that every bite and sip he takes has first passed your lips. Your survival and his depends on your acute senses and unwavering vigilance. You find yourself in the opulent dining hall of an imperial palace, a place of immense luxury that belies the constant underlying tension. Fine fabrics drape the walls, exotic dishes are laid out on silver platters, and the air is fragrant with spices. Yet beneath the veneer of grandeur, a dark threat always loomed: poison. In an age of ruthless political intrigue and frequent assassinations, poisoning was a favored method for dispatching rivals, and no one was more at risk than the emperor himself. This mainstream historical fact that Roman emperors employed food tasters known as praegustatores to protect them from assassination by poisoning highlights the pervasive fear and paranoia that often characterized imperial life. Your role as a praegustator is unenviable. Before any dish or drink touches the emperor's lips, you must sample it. You watch as a servant presents a plate of roasted peacock, its feathers still artfully arranged. A small portion is offered to you. You carefully take a bite, chewing slowly, allowing the flavors to register, listening for any odd sensation, any tingling on the tongue, any faint bitterness. Your life depends on detecting the undetectable. It's a high-stakes culinary review where the penalty for a poor rating is death. This wasn't just about identifying a strange taste. Many poisons were tasteless or designed to have a delayed effect. So you'd also be observing the food for any unusual discoloration, any suspicious bubbles in the wine, or even peculiar consistencies. The job required immense concentration and a finely tuned sense of smell and taste honed over years of rigorous high-pressure training. And even then, it was a gamble. You might be asked to sample a wide array of foods and drinks, from wine to exotic fruits, each a potential vector for a deadly plot. You can almost feel the knot of anxiety in your stomach with every new dish presented. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some emperors took even more elaborate precautions. Emperor Claudius, for instance, who was famously paranoid about poison and allegedly had several pregustatores himself, reportedly had his tasters use special tools, like spoons made of lignum asperum, a wood believed to neutralize poisons, or even taste food directly from the cook's hand, hoping to catch a nervous tremor. It's a fascinating, if ultimately futile attempt to add another layer of security, revealing the deep-seated distrust that permeated the imperial court. You can picture Claudius' eyes narrowed, watching his tasters with hawk-like intensity, convinced that danger lurked in every bite. Historians still argue whether the pregustatores were truly effective in preventing poisonings, or if their existence was more about psychological deterrence and a public display of imperial vigilance. Were they genuinely successful at their job, or simply sacrificed as a symbolic gesture of the emperor's vulnerability? You might consider that despite their presence, several emperors, including Claudius himself, were rumored to have died by poison. This suggests that even the best taster was no match for a truly cunning and well-executed assassination plot. The job, you realize, was perhaps less about foolproof protection and more about projecting an image of control and vigilance. The life of a pregustator was one of constant tension and limited longevity. They were highly trusted, often slaves or freedmen, who had risen through the ranks of the imperial household due to their loyalty and perceived immunity to specific toxins. Yet their very existence was predicated on their expendability. They were the ultimate human shields, living on the razor's edge between duty and demise. You can sense the strained silence in the dining hall as the emperor waits for your subtle nod of approval, knowing that your life could end with a single involuntary spasm. The taste of power for them was often the taste of fear. You've seen the fascinating, if somewhat nauseating, realities of the urine collectors and the perilous lives of the food tasters. Now let's explore how the Romans, despite their lack of modern technology, engineered solutions for the logistical and sanitary challenges of a sprawling metropolis. This wasn't just about waste disposal. It was about the very fabric of urban life, ensuring the city functioned, albeit sometimes with a distinct aroma. Imagine yourself navigating the crowded streets of ancient Rome. You'd be struck by the sheer volume of people, animals, and commerce. This created immense challenges for sanitation and public health. Unlike many ancient cities that simply let waste pile up in the streets, the Romans, with their pragmatic brilliance, developed sophisticated systems. This mainstream historical fact that the Romans developed advanced engineering solutions like aqueduct sewers and public latrines to manage water and waste showcases their remarkable ingenuity and foresight in urban planning. The aqueducts are perhaps their most famous achievement. You see them stretching across the landscape, monumental arches carrying fresh water from distant springs and rivers directly into the city. This wasn't just for drinking. It supplied public fountains, private homes of the wealthy, and crucially, the public baths. Without this constant influx of clean water, the city would have struggled to support its massive population and maintain any semblance of hygiene. You can almost hear the steady rush of water, a symphony of engineering, as it flows into the heart of Rome. But what goes in must come out right. And that's where the sewers come in. Beneath your feet, a vast network of subterranean channels carried away human waste and stormwater. The most famous of these is the Cloaca Maxima, literally the greatest sewer. Initially an open canal, it was later covered, becoming a complex underground system that drained the Roman Forum and surrounding areas into the Tiber River. You might wrinkle your nose thinking about it, but this monumental engineering feat, though perhaps not as glamorous as an amphitheater, was infinitely more important for public health. The public latrines were another marvel, if you can call them that. Imagine a long bench with multiple holes cut into it, often without privacy divisions, where Romans would sit side by side chatting and conducting business while relieving themselves over a flowing channel of water. It sounds incredibly unprivate to us, but for Romans, it was a social activity, a place for gossip and networking. You might find it amusing, if a bit unsettling, to picture a senator discussing politics while sharing a public toilet. This communal aspect is a quirky tidbit that highlights the stark cultural differences in personal habits. Of course, these systems weren't always perfect, and the smell was probably a constant companion in Roman life. While the main sewers carried away much of the waste, individual homes, especially those of the poorer citizens, might rely on cesspits or simply dispose of waste in the streets. You can almost detect the lingering odors, a blend of charcoal smoke cooking food, and the undeniable presence of uncollected waste even in the cleaner areas. Historians still argue whether the Roman emphasis on public hygiene was primarily driven by a scientific understanding of disease, or if it was more about aesthetics, convenience, and a display of imperial power. Did they truly grasp germ theory? Or was it simply common sense that clean water and waste removal led to a more pleasant city? You might observe how carefully the elite dressed, suggesting an aesthetic motivation, but also consider the sheer number of people living in close proximity, making disease a constant threat. It's likely a combination, a practical response to urban challenges, aided by empirical observation, rather than a deep scientific understanding. So, while the emperors held court and gladiators battled a less visible but equally vital part of Roman society, was at work managing the unseen currents of daily life. The aqueducts sang with fresh water, the sewers whispered with the flow of waste, and the public latrines provided a unique social hub. These feats of engineering, often taken for granted, were as crucial to the survival and success of Rome as any legion or political decree. They allowed a massive population to thrive, pushing the boundaries of urban living in ways that wouldn't be seen again for over 1,000 years. You've toured the unglamorous but vital back alleys of Roman life, from urine collectors to sewage systems. Now let's pivot sharply to something universally understood, yet practiced so differently in ancient Rome, the delicate, often dramatic dance of love and relationships. Forget swiping right or agonizing over text messages. In ancient Rome, dating was a public, often casual, and sometimes brutally direct affair. Imagine yourself in the bustling Roman Forum, the heart of public life. You see men and women mingling, perhaps a young Roman patrician trying to catch the eye of a woman under the watchful gaze of her chaperone, or a group of young men openly admiring women passing by. This wasn't a world of discreet coffee dates or private rendezvous. Life, including romance, was largely conducted in public spaces, the forum, the baths, dinner parties, even the grand spectacles of the amphitheater. This mainstream historical fact that dating and courtship in ancient Rome were often public and less formalized than modern practices highlights a vastly different approach to nascent relationships. Courtship, if you can even call it that, for many Romans wasn't about dating in our sense. There was no sequential progression of exclusive dates designed to lead to marriage. Instead, it was more about establishing connections, showing interest, and often, quite frankly, demonstrating availability. A man might send a woman flowers or notes or simply try to engage her in conversation in a public setting. For women, especially respectable ones, modesty was paramount, but subtle cues were allowed. You might see a woman lower her gaze demurely or offer a slight smile signals that would be understood by an eager suitor. Physical attraction was certainly a factor just as it is today. Roman poetry and art are filled with descriptions of beautiful bodies, alluring eyes, and captivating smiles. But it wasn't just about looks. Status, family connections, and wealth were always simmering beneath the surface of any romantic overture, particularly for the upper classes. A good match often meant a good alliance, a strengthening of family ties, or an improvement in social standing. You might overhear a Roman mother advising her daughter about the suitability of a potential admirer with references to his family's reputation rather than his charm. Now for a quirky tidbit: graffiti. That ancient form of social media often served as a public declaration of love, or at least infatuation. From simple declarations like "Gaius loves Maria," scrawled on a wall in Pompeii, to more explicit boasts and insults, Roman walls provided a canvas for public expressions of lust and affection. Imagine walking down the street and seeing your crush's name, or worse, your own, plastered on a wall for all to see. It's a far cry from a private direct message, isn't it? This raw public display of emotion gives you a direct, unfiltered glimpse into the romantic lives of ordinary Romans. Historians still argue whether Roman notions of love were primarily driven by pragmatic considerations of family and status, or if genuine affection and passion were truly valued in relationships. Was love a secondary outcome of a good match or an essential ingredient? From the start, you might read the passionate words of a Roman poet, like Catullus, lamenting his lost love, and contrast them with the dry legal language of marriage contracts. The truth, you realize, is probably a spectrum, with some Romans marrying for love, others for alliance, and many experiencing a blend of both over time. For the lower classes, and particularly for slaves, the landscape of love was even more fluid and often heartbreakingly constrained. Slaves could not legally marry, though they often formed strong, enduring partnerships that were recognized socially, if not legally. Their marriages were contubernium, essentially cohabitation without legal rights, subject to the whims of their owners. You might see a slave couple their bond evident in their quiet gestures of affection, knowing that their relationship could be torn apart at any moment by a sale or transfer. The pursuit of love, or at least companionship in ancient Rome, was a far less private and regulated affair than modern dating. It was woven into the fabric of public life, influenced by social standing, and often declared for all to see on a crumbling wall. It was a world where passion and pragmatism coexisted, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes with brutal clashes in a society far less concerned with individual privacy than our own. And as you walk away, you reflect on how, despite the millennia, the fundamental human desire for connection remains, however differently expressed. You've seen the casual public dance of Roman courtship, but now let's delve into the ultimate goal for most respectable Roman relationships: marriage. This wasn't primarily a tale of romantic love, though that could certainly develop. Instead, Roman marriage was a carefully orchestrated social and economic alliance, a cornerstone of family continuity and societal stability. Imagine yourself at a Roman wedding ceremony. It might not be the grand white dress affair you picture today. For many, especially the elite, it was a more understated yet deeply significant event. The bride, typically quite young girls, could be betrothed as early as 12, though marriages usually happened a few years later, might wear a white tunic, a flame-colored veil, and special shoes. The mainstream historical fact here is critical. Roman marriages, particularly among the elite, were primarily strategic alliances designed to strengthen family ties, consolidate wealth, and enhance social standing. Love was a bonus, not a prerequisite. Consider the role of the families. Parents, especially fathers, played a central role in arranging marriages. A young man and woman might have little say in the matter. The focus was on dignitas, reputation, familia, family lineage, and patrimonium, inheritance. A well-placed marriage could secure political influence, merge estates, or produce heirs who would carry on the family name and traditions. You can almost hear the discussions between two Roman fathers, poring over genealogies and property deeds, negotiating the terms of a union as if it were a business merger. It was in many ways exactly that. There were different forms of Roman marriage. The most common was cum manu, meaning with hand. In this form, the wife legally passed from the control of her father to the control of her husband, becoming part of his family and losing her rights to her birth family's inheritance. This was more common in the earlier republic. Later, a less restrictive form, sine manu, without hand, became prevalent, particularly among the elite. Here, the wife remained legally under her father's authority even after marriage. This meant she retained her rights to her birth family's inheritance, which was a significant advantage for wealthy women and their families. You might observe a Roman woman outwardly deferential, but inwardly calculating, aware of the complex legal and financial implications of her marital status. Now, for a quirky tidbit, to avoid the wife passing cum manu into her husband's control, a couple could simply live together for a year and a day without a formal marriage ceremony, and she would then legally be considered married sine manu. However, if she wanted to prevent the cum manu transfer, she could simply absent herself from her husband's house for 3 consecutive nights each year. This quirky loophole allowed women a sliver of legal autonomy within the system, highlighting the Roman legal system's blend of strict tradition and pragmatic flexibility. Imagine a couple meticulously planning their annual 3-night break to ensure the wife retained her legal independence. Despite the strategic nature of marriage, personal affection certainly existed. Roman letters and poetry often revealed deep bonds of love and companionship between spouses. It wasn't uncommon for couples to grow to genuinely love and respect each other, even if their union began as an arrangement. Divorce was also relatively easy to obtain, especially for men, and sometimes for women, by simply declaring the marriage dissolved. This could be due to incompatibility, lack of children, or even political expediency. You might see a couple once united by family interests, now estranged and dissolving their bond with a simple declaration, a stark contrast to the religious and legal complexities of divorce in later eras. Historians still argue whether the apparent ease of divorce in Rome indicates a more liberal view of marriage and personal freedom, or if it merely reflects the pragmatic and utilitarian nature of Roman unions. Was it a sign of enlightened social attitudes, or simply another tool in the strategic game of Roman family politics? You might see families scrambling to arrange new alliances after a divorce, suggesting that pragmatism often outweighed sentiment. The prevalence of divorce, however, certainly points to a society that viewed marriage less as an unbreakable sacred bond and more as a dissolvable contract. As you consider the Roman approach to marriage, you realize it was a testament to their hierarchical and practical mindset. Love was secondary to lineage personal desire, often subjugated to family ambition, and the institution itself was a flexible instrument for social and economic stability. It was a world where a carefully chosen spouse was a powerful asset, and a well-managed family was the bedrock of Roman society. You feel the weight of tradition and expectation shaping lives and destinies, even in the most intimate of relationships. You've explored the strategic nature of Roman marriage, a world of alliances and pragmatism. But beneath the surface of arranged unions and family interests, Roman society also pulsed with raw, unrestrained passion, sometimes illicit, often scandalous, and always a testament to the enduring complexities of the human heart. This was a world where love and lust often defied societal conventions, leading to affairs, intrigues, and dramatic personal narratives that still echo through history. Imagine yourself at a lavish Roman dinner party, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and expensive wine. The conversations are lively, the laughter flows freely. But beneath the convivial surface, you might catch a furtive glance, a whispered word, a touch that lingers too long. Adultery, while technically punishable by law, especially for women post-Augustus, was a pervasive reality among all social classes. This mainstream historical fact, that infidelity, while legally proscribed, was a common and often openly discussed aspect of Roman social life, underscores the gap between the strictures of law and the realities of human behavior. For men, extramarital affairs were often tolerated, even expected, particularly with enslaved women, freed women, or courtesans. As long as a man didn't compromise his family's honor or engage in relations with another respectable Roman matron, society largely turned a blind eye. You might see a prominent senator openly maintaining a mistress, and while it might be fodder for gossip, it rarely ruined his career, unless it escalated into a major scandal. It was a clear double standard reflecting the patriarchal nature of Roman society, where male sexual freedom was largely assumed, while female chastity was rigorously enforced. For women, however, the stakes were much higher. After the reforms of Emperor Augustus, adultery for women became a public crime, not just a private family matter. A woman caught in adultery could face severe penalties, including exile and confiscation of property. Yet despite these harsh laws, affairs still happen. You might witness a Roman matron stifled by an arranged marriage, risking everything for a passionate connection with a dashing young man, or even, as you recall from earlier, a gladiator. The thrill of the forbidden perhaps made the passion burn even brighter. Now for a quirky tidbit, to avoid charges of adultery, some Roman men would simply purchase the rights to their female partners from their owners, effectively making them their property, and thus legalizing sexual relations outside of marriage. Or, if the woman was respectable but not married, their relationship might simply be conducted discreetly. This legal maneuvering and social leniency for men created a complex web of relationships that often blurred the lines between official marriage and informal partnerships. It speaks to a society that was both obsessed with moral codes and incredibly adept at finding loopholes. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of extramarital affairs in Rome indicates a fundamental disconnect between public morality and private conduct, or if the laws were simply too idealistic for a society that struggled to enforce them consistently. Was it a sign of moral decay, or simply a realistic reflection of human desires that no legislation could truly suppress? You might consider the sheer volume of Roman satirical poetry that lampooned promiscuity, suggesting that while it was commonplace, it was not always entirely approved of. The Roman moral compass, you realize, was a rather wobbly thing. Beyond mere adultery, some relationships pushed even further against the boundaries of Roman convention. Homosexual relationships, while not always legally sanctioned, particularly for male citizens in a passive role, were certainly present and sometimes celebrated, particularly in certain literary circles. Relationships between powerful patrons and their clients, or even between teachers and their students, could sometimes take a romantic or sexual turn. Roman society, you realize, was far more complex and fluid in its sexual dynamics than a simple glance at its marriage laws might suggest. As you consider the vibrant, often messy tapestry of Roman love and lust, you appreciate the timelessness of human desire. Despite the grand structures, the powerful emperors, and the strict social codes, Romans were just as prone to passion, heartbreak, and forbidden longing as anyone today. Their affairs, their whispered secrets, and their scandalous unions paint a vivid picture of a society where the heart often defiantly followed its own path, creating dramas as compelling as any gladiatorial contest. You've delved into the scandalous affairs and passionate liaisons of Roman society, often outside the bounds of traditional marriage. Now, let's widen our gaze to include the diverse roles women played beyond that of wife and mother, particularly those who operated on the fringes of respectability, the courtesans and companions. These women, often highly educated and cultured, occupied a unique and sometimes powerful position in Roman life, offering companionship and intellectual stimulation that wives often could not. Imagine yourself at a sophisticated Roman symposium, a gathering of prominent men discussing philosophy, politics, and poetry. Among them, you might notice a woman who isn't a wife or a daughter of the household, yet she holds court, engaging in witty banter, quoting Greek literature, and captivating the attention of the assembled elite. This isn't a gladiator groupie. This is a courtesan, a woman of refined tastes and intellect. This mainstream historical fact that high-class Roman courtesans, unlike common prostitutes, often offered intellectual companionship and entertainment in addition to sexual services, distinguishes them as more than just bodies for hire. These women, sometimes called meretrices, though that term also covered common prostitutes, could be extremely wealthy and influential. They were often freed women, or even foreign women unburdened by the rigid social expectations placed upon respectable Roman matrons. They could own property, manage their own finances, and live with a degree of independence unimaginable for many married women. You might see a courtesan, arriving at a public event in a lavish litter, adorned with expensive jewelry, commanding respect and envy in equal measure. They were, in many ways, the original power women, albeit operating outside the conventional social structure. Their homes often became centers of intellectual and social life, rivaling the salons of aristocratic wives. Men would flock to them, not just for physical pleasure, but for stimulating conversation, a respite from the often stifling formality of their marriages. They offered an escape, a place where men could discuss philosophy without the pressure of family decorum, or simply indulge in lighter, more playful interactions. You can almost hear the discussions in a courtesan's villa, far more animated and open than those in a traditional Roman household. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some courtesans were so famous and sought after that they had fan bases comparable to those of gladiators or charioteers. Their names were whispered, their charms celebrated in poetry, and their lifestyles mimicked by those who could afford it. Imagine a Roman celebrity gossip column, and these women would frequently grace its pages, their latest outfits, lovers and parties meticulously detailed. They were figures of fascination embodying a certain freedom and glamour that respectable women could only dream of. Historians still argue whether the existence of these independent, often educated courtesans indicates a subtle form of female empowerment in Roman society, or if their freedom was merely a facade ultimately serving male pleasure and convenience within a patriarchal system. Were they genuinely self-made women who navigated the system to their advantage? Or were they still fundamentally defined by their relationships with men? You might consider the limits of their autonomy. They were still dependent on male patronage, and their social standing, while elevated for their profession, was never truly on par with that of a respected Roman matron. The answer, you realize, is likely a complex interplay of both. Beyond the high-class courtesans, of course, was a vast underclass of prostitutes, both male and female slaves, and free operating in brothels or on the streets. Their lives were far grimmer, marked by exploitation and little agency. The world of Roman sexuality was stratified just like every other aspect of their society, with a wide spectrum of experiences from the powerful courtesan to the utterly subjugated slave. As you step away from this glimpse into Roman companions, you appreciate the nuanced roles women could carve out for themselves, even within a restrictive society. While many were confined to the domestic sphere, others found ways to exert influence, accumulate wealth, and command respect, even if their paths were unconventional. Their stories remind you that human relationships, driven by desire, intellect, and companionship, often find ways to bloom even in the unlikeliest of social soils. You've journeyed through the gladiatorial arenas, peered into the murky depths of Roman sanitation, and glimpsed the passionate, often pragmatic complexities of love and relationships. Now, as our journey through ancient Rome draws to a close, let's reflect on the profound legacy of these seemingly disparate threads and how they continue to echo in our modern world far more than you might initially imagine. Think back to the gladiators, those paradoxical figures of celebrity and property. Their fame, their brutal discipline, and their ability to capture the public imagination were in many ways the original blueprint for our modern obsession with celebrity athletes. The roar of the Colosseum audience demanding a thumbs up or thumbs down isn't so different from the fervent screams of fans in a stadium today, desperate for their team to win. This mainstream historical fact, that the Roman gladiatorial games laid foundational elements for modern mass entertainment and the concept of celebrity through spectacle is undeniable. From reality TV to professional sports, the hunger for dramatic contests and larger-than-life figures remains a powerful human impulse. You might even find yourself unconsciously mimicking a thumbs-down gesture when critiquing a movie. The Roman approach to property and the dehumanizing concept of owning another human being casts a long shadow. While the specific legal definitions have changed the historical legacy of slavery, and the systemic inequities it produced continue to shape societies globally. The gladiators' struggle for freedom, their fight against the ultimate commodification, reminds you of ongoing battles for human rights and dignity around the world. It's a chilling reminder that the line between person and property, however unthinkable to us, was once a legal reality. Now, consider the odd jobs of ancient Rome, like the urine collectors and food tasters. While their specific professions might seem quaint or repulsive to us, their existence highlights the ingenuity and adaptability of societies in solving everyday problems with the available resources. This leads to a quirky tidbit. Even today, in some niche industries, there are highly specialized and seemingly unusual jobs that are absolutely vital, though perhaps hidden from plain sight. Think of forensic entomologists studying insect larvae on bodies, or professional sniffers hired by perfume companies, or even chicken sexers who distinguish male from female chicks. We still rely on human senses and specialized skills in ways that would make a Roman praegastator nod in understanding. The debate among historians about whether Roman sanitation was about disease prevention or display of power isn't so different from modern discussions about public infrastructure. Are our grand highways and gleaming public buildings primarily for utility or also a statement of national wealth and prestige? Historians still argue whether our modern healthcare systems are purely about public well-being, or if they too have elements of political and economic display. The Romans' practical solutions, like their aqueducts and sewers, continue to inspire engineering marvels, serving as a testament to the enduring human need for efficient systems, even if the underlying motivations are complex. Finally, think about love and lust in ancient Rome. The strategic alliances of Roman marriages, often arranged for status and wealth, are reflected in historical royal marriages, and to some extent in modern society, where socio-economic considerations can still subtly or not so subtly influence romantic partnerships. The public nature of Roman courtship, free from the digital screens we hide behind, forces you to consider how our own romantic lives are shaped by technology and privacy. The passionate affairs and illicit relationships remind you that human desire in all its messy, glorious forms transcends time and cultural boundaries. The enduring appeal of forbidden love, the search for connection beyond societal norms, these are stories as old as Rome itself. Historians still argue whether modern concepts of romantic love are a direct evolution from ancient sensibilities or a distinct cultural construct. Was it the poets who invented love, or did they merely reflect an inherent human experience? You reflect on the shared human experiences, the longing, the jealousy, the joy, that connect us to these ancient Romans despite the vast chasm of time and culture. Their methods of dating, mating, and relating may have been different, but the fundamental desires remain the same. As the sun truly sets on our Roman adventure tonight, you're left with a sense of awe at the intricate, often contradictory nature of this ancient civilization. They were engineers of monumental structures and architects of brutal entertainment. They were pragmatists in love and connoisseurs of spectacle. And in their triumphs and their flaws, in their peculiar jobs and their dramatic lives, you can still see reflections of our own world, reminding us that history isn't just about the past. It's a mirror held up to the present. Sweet dreams.